Really is that ability to understand what the cause is that then allows you to say, okay, now we need to figure out what can we do to manage this? Can we treat the virus? And so the other thing I guess that I would say would fall into the lucky timing of this epidemic is that we were also just beginning to develop drugs that worked against viruses. Up until the late 80s, all of our anti-infective therapy was either antibacterial, 95% of it, or we had antifungal therapy. We were just beginning with acyclovir to learn what we needed to do to treat viruses. And so it was possible to take this kind of very early knowledge about managing viruses and to apply all those resources to the issue of how we're going to deal with this new virus, which by that point was known as HIV.
When did the first therapy that you had come around, and what are the milestones in the past 20 years that we've gone through with therapies?
Really, I think understand what the impact of all this is. You have to kind of put yourself back in the mid-'80s and think about taking care of people with this disease in that era, because you essentially had nothing that you could do that would make a difference for them. You took care of the complications. You told them to do the things their mom always told them to do: eat a healthy diet, get plenty of rest, exercise, don't smoke, don't drink, don't use drugs, and then you watched them die, because really it was just an inexorable march towards death. And it was incredibly difficult. It just sapped energy to see patients in clinic, and they came to you and hoped that you would do something to make a difference. And aside from treating these complications and trying to make them better, there really was almost nothing that could be done. Fortunately, again, understanding what the cause was and applying our sort of early knowledge about viral diseases to the question of how can we treat this particular virus, there was a drug that had already been studied to a degree that was had been put on the top shelf and was gathering dust, that people said maybe this will be something that could affect this virus, and that of course was AZT. And in 1987, that drug was licensed by the FDA because it had shown to lead to clinical improvement. People who got AZT compared to those who did not, they had I would say about 1 year of added good health to their lifespan. And in '87, we really were having big debates about, should we save this drug until people are sick and use it then, or should we use it earlier to try and keep people healthy longer before complications occur? And it's a manifestation of how limited our options were that was kind of the nature of the debate. So that's 1987. AZT becomes an incredibly precious commodity. We didn't really understand what we had to do to make it work right. Unfortunately, it took 4 more years, 1991, until the second drug was approved, and then 2 years after that for the third drug. And in all honesty, the second and third and fourth and fifth drugs really were helpful, but they didn't make a huge difference to outcome. They probably allowed us to extend the period of better health a few months, but we were still in a kind of a sticking our fingers in the dike situation and watching people die. And end of '93, first part of '94, and at that time our clinic was about 600 patients. We'd get about 150 new patients a year. At the end of the year, we'd still have about 600 patients because we'd have about 150 die. And we used to have a ceremony at the end of the calendar year, a very somber, emotional thing where we would read the names of all the people that had died the previous year. Now we're approaching 1,800 patients, but we have a fraction of the numbers of deaths. And so, we're taking care of only 600 then, but in terms of the amount of energy involved, the amount of emotional investment in taking care of the patients, it was exhausting. It was really hard work.
What made the difference?
Well, the difference in terms of how we made it to where we could actually change the discussion from, make sure you've got a will, make sure you've talked to your next of kin, how are you going to prepare for the time when you can't work and you're really sick, and preparing people for death, people who were 25 and 30 years old, to transform that into, okay, here's what you have to do to live for decades, and if you do this right, you're going to be able to control this disease and really transform yourself back to good health. I think if you ask people like me who've been doing this for a long time, what year was the watershed year, we would all say 1996. And the reason is that the International AIDS meeting in Vancouver that year included the first presentations of a new class of drugs called HIV protease inhibitors. And we showed that when those drugs were combined with the earlier drugs we had, it was possible for the first time to not just affect the amount of virus and the damage the virus was doing, but actually to suppress the virus completely. We could turn the virus off, if you will, and allow the body to start healing itself.
And that's what you call the cocktail, right?
That's what was called the cocktail, right? And in fact, it generated a sense of optimism that I think was extraordinarily welcome after so much pessimism and negative feelings. But at the same time, I think the pendulum swung too far, and people started talking about, well, if we can suppress the virus, it won't take too long for the virus to be completely cleared from the body. And people were doing mathematical models that said if you can keep the virus suppressed for 2 or 3 years, people will be cured. And there was this almost euphoria to having gone from an inevitable death sentence to talking about cure in the span of just a few months. It turned out those predictions were wildly optimistic. After 1996 through 2009, we've taken that possibility, which only a few very hardy, dedicated souls could actually do correctly, and we've made it accessible to almost everyone. We've improved the therapy so it's many fewer pills. Almost, for most people, it's possible to get them on a combination that has few, if any, side effects. And therefore, we make it so that almost everyone with HIV should be able to get started on a treatment that will control their infection, and it will be a treatment of quality such that they can do it consistently, indefinitely. I like to tell patients that I believe in the next 1 to 2 decades we will have a cure for HIV.